Hey guys, Amy Hall says, what book or artist will you cover next? Not sure if I'll cover another artist after this. Book-wise, it might be Kathleen Hale's book. I'm not sure. I'm open to suggestions. Patty, good to see you here. Stephanie, congrats with your son's um, robotics invitational quarterfinals. Not bad. Okay, so we are going to commence with this letter from the 14th of May, 1882. And you may remember that he's just sort of admitted to his brother about the goings on in The Hague. You know, he now has sort of admitted that he's in love with someone and he's sort of forced to do that. He was forced to admit what was going on because of a falling out with Mauve. And so I guess he wanted to beat Mauve to the punch by killing his brother firsthand. And so this is still kind of the damage control following that. Now, although we're going to go through these letters, I'm trying to get to June. I'm trying to get from May to June, which is where Van Gogh's father comes to visit him, where Van Gogh is hospitalized. And then that'll conclude this 1882 period. Then we're going to jump forward in time. Um, I'm going to decide whether to make it a year or two. I kind of want to get to the Noonan period, which is the period where he painted this picture that has made world headlines. So I'm going to deal with this article and I'm going to deal with this topic a little bit later in today's episode. But so hold on for that. But before we get to that, we're going to deal with a couple of letters first. So let's do that. Robbie Robin, good to see you here. Karina, hi from Austria. Wanzi, good to see you as well. Are you guys happy with me to get started? Are you guys happy to get going? Okay, well, I think I am going to get going, so I'll try and keep chat in mind as we get going. There's just so much to get through that I don't want to spend too much time on how do you do's, right? Okay, so this first letter that we're dealing with, 14th May, I think there's another letter, also the 14th of May. Let's have a look. Yeah, so he's writing quite a few letters to his brother. Let's just see if there's another 14th of May before this. Yeah, so basically he's writing almost two letters a day. He's really doing kind of damage control here, right? Yes, Timmy. Vincent's doing damage control. Damage control. It's important. Okay, so he writes the following. Timmy, do you want to lie down more comfortably? Okay, so he writes, my dear Theo, having received your letter of 13 May, which must have crossed a letter of mine to you, meaning when the one was coming, the other one was going. He says, I find it necessary to explain a few things to you without delay. So you can see that he's clearly stressed that, what does my brother think? What is going to happen? What is the outcome of this going to be? Is really trying to sort of do damage control. And he says, a great deal of what I read in your letter, I certainly appreciate very much. For instance, one must be narrow minded or hypocritical to set one class without question above another. So there's a reference to what Theo said to him. So Theo is kind of agreeing that this whole idea of class is hypocritical, right? And that is certainly what's the word? It's a positive for Vincent. It's something that he can put in his pocket in a way, to say, thanks a lot, Theo. I see you on my side, right? Then he goes on to say, the world, however, does not reason like that. That's true, and never sees or respects man's humanity, but only the greater or lesser value of the money or goods he carries with him, so long as he is on the side of the grave. The world takes no account at all of what happens beyond the grave. That is why the world goes no further than its feet will take it. For my part, however, I feel sympathy or antipathy for men just as men and their circumstances leave me relatively indifferent. Yet even I take some note, and were my own circumstances to allow me, I should make even further concessions when you say there are many who maintain a certain social standing in order to avoid attention from others and lest people meddle too much in their affairs. Very often indeed, I let things pass, thinking I'm not going to do or say this or that in case I give offense to somebody or other. Now, if you think about it, it's quite strange reading this because if you think about it, it has relevance in our social media society. What people say, what people think, people meddling in affairs. Am I going to say this? Am I going to let that pass? Is this giving offense? So just think about the um, culture and the sensitivity to what people think in like 150 years ago and where we are now. It's almost like we've gone back 150 years in terms of time, right? Karina says, I'm tending to vegetable stock but listening to every word. Karina, don't burn that vegetable stock. Make sure it's okay. I was actually boiling spinach today, and it was on the low boil for most of the day, and I also had to be careful not to burn that. So anyway, he goes on to say, but when it comes to important, serious matters, one must act not in accordance with, and I guess that's public opinion, but he uses a French phrase there, l'opinion publique, not according to one's own passions, but following the ABC, which is the basis of all morality. Love thy neighbor as thyself. Act in a way you can justify before God. Do the right thing and act loyally. Now, when it comes to Christine, and that's obviously a reference to Scene, that's kind of a nickname. He says, this is my reasoning. How should I like it if someone first helped me and then left me in the lurch? Wouldn't I think someone who behaves like that would have done better to have left me alone? If he doesn't finish what he started, he really has deceived me. Now, the irony of all this, of course, is that Scene is eventually going to dump him. It's not going to be a case that he gets tired of the burden of looking after her. It's not going to be a case that he finds her in some or other way objectionable or disagreeable, despite him putting himself so out there for her. She actually, in the end, dumps him. He's not good enough for her, and I think that also speaks volumes. I mean, it's one thing to um, find someone who is in a way, what's the word? Um, not quite sure how to put it without being disagreeable or without being objectionable or insulting, but it's almost like he's so desperate that he will take anyone, and then the one person who will accept him, you'd think would want to hang on to him. Instead, that person actually finds him a bit too much for her. Even this dude from like this privileged society that's putting himself out there kind of eventually says, look, I've had enough, I'm out of here, kind of thing. So it's quite ironic when he says, um, how would how should I like it if someone first helped me and then left me in the lurch? Well, that's exactly what she's going to do to him. She's going to leave him in the lurch, right? So again, with all of this kind of pitching and arguing and making the case for why he should be allowed to have this relationship, well, it's all going to come to naught anyway. It's just another tragic um, and in a way pathetic backstory to Vincent van Gogh, right? So he goes on to say the father of ex-teens, and so when he refers to that way, it's quite a weird way that that the fact that he does that. He writes her name as an X. There's a reference to it. There's another one. There are quite a few. There's another one. Um, it's quite strange that he does that. Just trying to find one more. Wow, this is a long letter. There's another one. It's quite strange that he almost not dehumanizes her, but depersonalizes her by putting an X instead of her name in the effort, or within the context of the effort that he's making to personalize her, to make her into a person, right? It's quite ironic. Anyway, so here he's going to be talking about scene, and then also about how this is contextually relevant to Key Boss. And I've always felt that Key Boss basically drove him to take this extreme action. He was so desperately in love that he felt like, I've got to be in a relationship now. I'm almost 30 years old. I've got to start living. I've got to start doing the things that are part of, a man being a man kind of thing. I've got to get going. And so he jumps in, right, as quickly as he can, and he doesn't really care about the consequences. Corinus is very strange indeed. So now he's kind of again justifying it. He says, the father of Christine's child argued in the exact spirit of your letter, Theo. So in a way, it seems like Van Gogh's even confronting the father of the child. He's actually taking the place of this father, even though he can't provide, right? And so he's getting in the thick of things. And then he says, but in my opinion, quite wrongly, he was very kind to her, but did not marry her, even when he had made her pregnant, for the sake, he said, of his position and his family, etc. So Van Gogh is kind of saying, you pregnant, I'm going to make you respectable, I'm going to marry you, kind of thing. And that's not really what she wants, kind of thing. So anyway, there's another reference that X Foreseen was young at the time and had met him after her father's death, didn't know then what she knows now. And when the man died, there she was alone with her child, forsaken without a penny. A contrecoeur reluctantly went on the streets, became ill, was taken to hospital in all sorts of trouble. That man's behavior made him guilty before God, although in the eyes of the world he had kept up his position, had paid her off. But at the moment when he faced death, do you imagine he felt no regret and remorse? Now, in this world, the characters of people like him come up against characters like, say, mine. I care as little for the world as the aforesaid person cared for what is right. The semblance of doing right was enough for him. As for me, I wouldn't give you tuppence for the world's opinion. That's quite a Van Goghy thing to say, right? That's quite a Van Goghy thing to say. I wouldn't give you tuppence for the world's opinion. What comes first and foremost with me is this: I will not deceive or forsake a woman. So that's quite a intense and strong statement. Van Gogh seems like the champion for women, right? I will not deceive or forsake a woman, right? Now, I wonder what he would say in terms of a man, in terms of that. Because isn't the world half men, half women, or, you know what I mean? Like, it's not just women kind of thing. There are probably some people who are going to take exception to me putting it that way, but I think you know what I mean. The world isn't just women, it's also other genders and other orientations. Anyway, he says, if a woman refuses to have anything to do with me, like he boss, there he brings her up. I don't try to force her, no matter how strong my passion. I turn away with desolation in my heart the moment my own she and no other is met by her, certainly not him. I don't know whether that's really true. You did get a sense of insistence and coercion, right, from from the whole Kivos affair. You did get a sense of that, and that does come up. So he says, I will not force and I will not forsake, and I too protest when I myself am forced or forsaken. If I were married to a woman and I realized that that woman was carrying on with another, I wouldn't stand for any nonsense, but even then I wouldn't forsake her before I had tried everything possible to bring her back. So you see what I think of marriage and that I take it seriously. So you can see that Van Gogh is kind of preoccupied with marriage. His next step is he wants to be married, he wants a home, he wants like a family life. That's like for him the a very necessary and fundamental step. And of course, in the same way that he has this fairy tale in his mind of being married to a woman that he barely knows and having a family also that isn't even his, he also has this fairy tale of selling his paintings, right? They are equally delusional in a sense. So he says, now, as you know, when I met Extine, so Seen, she was pregnant, ill, left out in the cold. I was alone and had just had the experience in Amsterdam I wrote you about. Well, there it is in his own words that he went from Kivos, went from being rejected by Kivos and all the acrimony with his family and his parents and her family, straight into the arms of a pregnant prostitute. I mean, there's no two ways about it. There was no cooling off period. This was Van Gogh on the rebound. He was like, I'm not going to mourn. I'm not going to grieve. I need instant gratification from this kind of thing. Do you see that? So he says, I started it, though not immediately with marriage in mind. However, I got to know her better. When I got to know her better, it became obvious to me that if I wanted to help her, I must set about it more seriously. Then I spoke to her frankly and I said, I think about this and that in such and such a way. I see your position and mine in such and such a way. I am poor, but I am no seducer. Will you be able to put up with me? Otherwise, there isn't any point in going on. At which she said, I want to be with you no matter how poor you are. Now, it's quite hard to know what to make of that. What did Seen see in this guy? And I think she assumed from the way he was that he was actually quite well off. I mean, he's quite well educated and all the rest. And, he has a place to stay. But it actually turns out that so after she's kind of moved in with him, she realizes, wow, he's actually not self-sufficient. He's actually getting pocket money from his brother. And that probably for her didn't reflect very well on him, right? She probably got the idea that this guy is to some extent independent. He's living on his own, only to find actually he's being funded essentially by other people. And that I think she found not particularly promising. And it's not, is it? So let's go back to this. So he says, and that is how it all came about. And before very long, now she will be going to Leiden, and I should like to marry her without any fuss straight after that. So he's in a hurry, isn't he? He wants to marry her ASAP. That's why I say his next goal is marriage, right? His next goal, that this is kind of what he has in mind. And he says, because otherwise there will be something false about her position and mine, which I most decidedly wish to avoid. Now, bear in mind, part of what is probably a problem for Mauve is that it's not just that Van Gogh is living with a prostitute who's pregnant. It's not just that his brother is paying for all of this, but there's also the cultural taboo of you can't do that. You can't live with someone that you're not married to in a situation like that. So in one foul swoop, Van Gogh is breaking like multiple taboos. She's pregnant. It's not his child. He's funding all of this with somebody else's money. and they're living together, and it's like this whole thing of living in sin, and it's this instant relationship. It's not even like he got to know her. It's like instantly, okay, I found you, let's get married, kind of thing, right? And I think Van Gogh thinks he's giving Sin exactly what she needs. He's giving her respectability, he's giving her support or whatever. But I think she's thinking, I do need support, I do need help, but dude, you are cuckoo. I'm out of here. Um, I'm sure I can find someone who's, you know, more promising than what you are, kind of thing. Anyway, he's in a rush to get married, and he says, I shall be like a workman with a trade in which she's my assistant. That's how he sees it. He sees that she's now going, if he marries her, she's kind of going to be almost like forced labor. She's going to be, what's the word? Yeah, instant family. She's going to be kind of a model where she likes it or not, kind of thing. And the fact is, he isn't a workman, and he doesn't have a trade. He's not going to sell anything. He's not going to bring home the bacon in any respect, right? And so her being his assistant, not going to happen either. She's going to actually go back to the streets. So that is actually how awful it is living with him, that she decides, you know what, this is actually crap. I'm out of here. I'm going to go back to what I know, right? Then he says, my drawings are in your hands, and for the first year at least, my bread and hers will depend on you and all those who are willing to help me, because you can see that I'm doing my best and that I have a gift of drawing, and I believe of painting as well, which little by little will become more evident. Now, just to give you an idea of how far from even being at the beginning of his artistic journey he is at this point. The painting that has made world headlines, the one of, I think it's Head of a Peasant Woman, it's this one. Head of a Peasant Woman from 1885. It would be something like 3 years later that he would finally paint this particular portrait. And this particular portrait would be part of, not sure if they actually show it here, but it would be part of the potato eaters painting, right? So it would take him another 3 years just to get to this point. And I mean, he never sold the potato eaters either, right? So I'm just saying, here he is making promises about his ability to earn an income imminently, and it's going to take 3 years just to get to the point of him painting a proper painting, right? And even then, he's still not really going to be successful, right? He's only eventually going to sell a painting, I think, in when he was in All, I think it was 1888, the Red Vineyard. So it would eventually take him another 6 years to sell his first painting, right? So he is talking a big game, and I mean, we know this in terms of hindsight, but the fact is he's talking a big game. He's not talking based on any kind of track record. And this kind of talk would kind of continue through his letters less and less, but nevertheless would be there. He's got to convince Theo to keep bankrolling him, even though he's got nothing to show for it. But I think he would eventually kind of acknowledge that he's failing, kind of thing. But without, in other words, he was failing and to some extent suffering, but not losing heart. Staying, and that is part of the incredible story of Van Gogh, is that he fails, but he nevertheless maintains some optimism. Whether that's delusional, I mean, you might say that's delusional, but look at then what happened ultimately with Van Gogh. He became this global celebrity, right? Okay, so we go on. He says, I have the gift of drawing and I believe of painting as well, which little by little will become more evident. Now, Theo, I do not think I'm disgracing my family by what I have done, and I wish my family would come to terms with it. Do you think it's true that he's not disgracing his family? He says, otherwise we will remain in opposite camps, and I will have to declare, I will not forsake a woman to whom I'm attached by a bond of mutual aid and respect in order to oblige anybody. So yeah, he's kind of setting up the goalposts, or the, what do you call it, the parameters of what is going on. Is basically saying, um, if you or my family expect certain things from me, then I'm not going to oblige you. My heart is sort of set on this. So this is where his passion comes out, doesn't it? He says, I've come to terms with her past, and she has come to terms with my past. If my family disowned me for seducing a woman and I'd actually done it, then I should feel like a blackguard. But if I were to be opposed because I remained loyal to a woman whom I had pledged my troth, I should despise my family. Not everyone is suited to be a painter's wife. She is willing. She learns something every day. I understand peculiarities in her character that have repelled others, but I think that's a reference to Tear Stick, would probably think of her what he thinks of me and say, she has a disagreeable nature and there's something unattractive about her, and there the matter would rest. So it's interesting that he brings up Tear Stick here. It's obviously a problem that Tierstig has expressed. I'm not happy with what's going on, and thus I'm not happy with you. Then he goes on to say, but it goes without saying that I have enough knowledge of the world and of human nature to ask for nothing more than that people should not oppose my marriage. See, he's already talking about marriage. And I hope that I will not be wanting for my daily bread as long as I can show that I'm doing my best and straining every nerve to become a good painter. In effect, what he's asking Theo to do is not only to pave his way as a painter, but now to pave his way as a married painter, and a married painter with stepkids. Theo, do you mind just paying for that? Thanks a lot, Theo. So he goes on to say, as long as I'm doing my best and straining every nerve to become a good painter, that should be fine. So he's just saying, Theo, as long as I'm doing my best, that should be good enough for everybody. He says, I shall not be visiting my family or anything of the sort, however, either by myself or with her, but shall remain in the walk of life to which my work has allotted me. And then nobody can take offense, unless men of iniquity should deliberately try to find a stumbling block, which I trust not to be the case. Now, just to remind ourselves of the situation, the context that this is in, is this isn't just some dude who's got a strange desire, a strange approach. It's the son of a pastor. It's someone from a very respectable family. It's a pastor who's got a congregation. And so he's not just crossing a line a little bit, he's absolutely blasting that to pieces, right? And if you think about it, there's a point where he wanted to be a pastor as well, right? So it's really quite crazy what is going on here in a way. Once he says, it's so good to be able to read with you. Okay. So now next paragraph, he says, however, you will find me most obliging in everything I'm able to do without being disloyal to Christine. I should very much like to have your advice on, for instance, where I should live. And of course, where the advice he gets from Theo on where he should live, well, Theo's going to be paying for it. So in a way, he's got a funny sense of humor about this. He says, if there's some objection to my remaining in The Hague, then I owe The Hague no loyalty. So he's kind of saying, Theo, if you want me to go and live in this town or that city or wherever, in other words, Theo, you're going to be paying for where I live, so I don't really care where I do live, right? It's definitely quite funny. Then he says, I can find somewhere to work wherever you think fit, be it a village or a town. The figures and the landscape that come my way will no doubt be interesting enough for me to do my best. So you are welcome to speak your mind freely on the subject. Well, again, jumping a bit ahead of time, we know for a fact that Vincent's going to end up moving back home, right? He's moved from The Hague with Scene. So let me put it this way. Right now he's in The Hague with Scene. The next step in his journey, he'll be moving back home to his parents. Do you think Scene is going to be coming along for that journey? Yeah, Paddy says it's so nice of him to give Theo a vote. So again, when you know what is going to happen, it's hard not to be sort of wickedly amused by what Van Gogh thinks is reality in his life, in a way. He says, it goes without saying that there must be no question of putting me under guardianship. I made my feelings concerning that perfectly clear during the Giel affair. That sort of thing would be quite inopportune. And I think that's a reference basically to having committed to an asylum. Like what you're doing, you are clearly cuckoo. So we actually going to have you, committed or something. And he's saying, I'm definitely not committed. Don't make that mistake. And obviously, in his future, he is going to be going to an asylum as well, right? Anyway, he goes on to say, but as far as being loyal or disloyal to Christine is concerned, my feeling is I must not break a promise of marriage. So now he's kind of making it, he's promised to marry her, and now he can't break that promise. Well, what do you think is going to happen? What do you think is going to happen in terms of that? Now he comes back to Key Voss. He said, had Key Voss been willing to listen to me last summer in Amsterdam, she might not have been so quick to send me packing, and then things would have been quite different. At the time, however, as you know, although I followed her all the way, although I pursued her as far as Amsterdam, all my attempts to speak to her or to establish anything with a certainty, anything I could rely on, that is proved futile. Now the very pace of life is driving and urging me on, as well as the work and the new things that crop up, and which I must tackle with a will if I want to hold my own in the bitter struggle. Taking things lying down is what I did in years gone by. I think that's quite an important point. Um, you do get a sense that Van Gogh was quite a passive fellow for too much of his youth, and now he's trying to make up for it, but he's sort of kind of overdoing it, isn't he? Paddy says he's taking this from the ridiculous to the sublime. Yeah, so he's now taking action and being alert. He's now living in the now. He's now, and that is something he needs to do. He's just applying it in a totally I don't want to say irrational, but in a totally inappropriate way, right? He does need to take action, but he's kind of trying to run before he walks. He still isn't an established painter, and he already wants to get married. But he's also running out of lifetime, right? He's almost 30 years old. Bear in mind, people got married a lot younger in that time than they do now, right? So then he goes on to say, so I consider your letter in the main quite mistaken. So that is obviously an indication that his letter, Theo's letter, was to some extent not all positive, and in fact the opposite. Because he says in the main quite mistaken. Then he says, but perhaps that is because you haven't thought things through. Theo, you haven't thought things through. That's quite ironic, isn't it? Theo, I don't think you've thought things through in terms of you paying for me getting married. I don't think you thought things through in terms of me being with this pregnant prostitute. immediately after Key Voss. And then he says, and I credit you with being better than that particular letter this morning suggests. He's saying, you know what, I think you are better than that. Then he says, you mentioned something that happened to you. I think I'm able to recall something about it very faintly in the dim and distant past. If I remember rightly, you were acquainted with a girl. So this is Theo's story about something in a similar vein, right? Quite an interesting. You were fond of her and slept with her. Now, I don't know who the person was, but I do know that you consulted father about it and also spoke to me about it. And that father then made you promise something about getting married. Ho ho. I don't know exactly what, but perhaps it was while you remained a minor, you would not do it without his consent. So this suggests that that Theo, good Theo, was doing certain things when he was very young. Um, you know, half the age that he is now, in theory, right? And so, in a way, you kind of get a sense that the Van Gogh boys aren't quite as sweet as you may have imagined. Not that there's anything wrong with um, um, what they're talking about, but it just paints a different picture of them, where you actually thought that they were um, a lot of life they were missing out on. Right now, you get a sense, oh, actually, something else is going on that they just weren't being completely transparent about. You also kind of get that funny feeling of, you guys, have you guys heard of that cliche about the children or the kids of pastors are often somewhat wild or somewhat wayward? I don't know if it's true in the countries that you're in, but I know quite a few people who are daughters or sons of um, religious folk, pastors or whatever. And certainly in my experience, it's been true. I don't know what if you guys have heard that sort of thing, but I think it was definitely true with the Van Gogh, certainly the oldest kids, right? Cor van Gogh, the youngest boy, he married and then he got divorced. So none of the Van Gogh boys kind of had um, respectable marriages except Theo, except that Theo had syphilis and kind of went off the deep end in the last, very, very tragically and very horribly, in the last sort of days of his life. That's also kind of a unknown story of Theo, is that Theo started going totally cuckoo. Theo was also in an asylum in the last sort of days of his life. But I mean, he did, while he was married to Joe, I think they had, of the three brothers, they had the best marriage, right? And is the only Van Gogh to actually have, to have produced a child. Anyway, and of course, Joe produced or was like a mother hen in terms of bringing the Van Gogh legacy to the world, herself along with Dr. Gachet and Dr. Gachet's son. Anyway, he goes on to say, the rest, what happened to the woman, I don't know. So here, Van Gogh, Vincent is reminding his brother, I remember what you did, like, I know what you did last summer, is reminding Theo, don't be too quick to judge me. I know what you did, right? And that is a pretty good argument. He says, since you were a minor, father had every right to step between the two of you, and I can understand why he did it. Now, the difference between your case and mine is that in the first place, you and she were considerably younger than Sean and I. And secondly, your future and mine are different. That is, I, for my part, ply a humble trade, and you hold a position which of necessity requires you to keep up a certain style. This is all clear enough. So, you know what? I think Van Gogh would have made quite a good lawyer. Do you agree with that? He says, this is all clear enough, it seems to me, and also that being a minor, you were right to obey, while I, for my part, being of age, am at liberty to say to father, this is a matter in which you cannot and must not press me. Now you say that what has happened between Scene and me does not mean I have to marry her. So that is what his brother's been saying to him. He's saying, you don't have to marry her. In effect, please don't marry her, right? And in the end, he doesn't, of course. This is what Scene and I think about it. We both want a very domesticated life, close together, need each other every day for our work, and like to be together every day. We want there to be nothing false in our position and consider marriage the only radical means of stopping the world talking and of seeing to it that we are not reproached with an illicit relationship. If we do not get married, they could indeed say that something or other is wrong. If we do get married, we shall be very poor and give up any social pretenses, but our action will be right and honorable. You will understand this, I think. So if you think about it, what's going on is Van Gogh is simultaneously saying, I don't care what anybody thinks, but then he's also saying, we're going to get married immediately so that people stop gossiping, right? I don't care what anyone thinks. I don't care, about anything. But then also, we're going to get married immediately so that tongues stop wagging and so that our relationship becomes right and honorable. So effectively, he does care what people think. But I think it's to some extent he's doing what he wants to do and is just justifying it. Then he says, but if you now say, Vincent, you're going to have a dreadful time and terrible worries, then what I shall reply is, yes, brother, I'm well aware of that. You are right. But my dear fellow, what I would find even worse would be the deep down inside of, you have treacherously abandoned that woman. Now, what I want to bring up here, is, again, the perception people have of Vincent van Gogh as this fragile artist, this guy who suffers and struggles with depression and then takes his own life, right? Well, what you can see here is just how tough he is. He puts himself right up against the full-blown opprobrium of his family, of his friends, of society, and he's like, I don't really give a tuppence what society thinks. I'm happy with what I want to do, right? And then he also says that if somebody said to him, like if his own brother said to him, Vincent, you are what is waiting for you, what is in store for you, is you're going to have a dreadful time and terrible worries. And he says, I'm well aware of that. He says, I know. I know I'm going to have a dreadful time. I know I'm going to be careworn. I know I'm going to struggle. I know I'm going to be poor. He says, I'm well aware of that, and you're right. Now, do you think someone like that is going to be suicidal when things aren't going very well? When he's told, do you know that this action is going to take you into adversity? Do you know this action is going to um, propel you into struggle and hardship? And Vincent's answer is, yes, I do know. Yes, I am aware. Yes, I want that. Yes, I'm okay with that. So where on earth do you sort of say, well, things didn't go well for Vincent and so he became depressed and suicidal? He's been struggling already his whole life, in a way, his whole adult life. This is part of that struggle. And it just shows you that he's not immune to the struggle, but he's used to the struggle. The struggle here is almost 10 times worse than the struggle he has in Orvez, right? The struggle here is he wants to be married. Is that going to happen? He doesn't have money on a day-to-day basis. His friends have sort of abandoned him. His family are disapproving of him and is trying to win their support. He's in a much more precarious position emotionally here. And look how strong he is in terms of that, right? The point I'm trying to make is you've got to compare how he deals with adversity and mental difficulty and trouble you've got to compare apples with apples. How does he deal with this scenario and then go into the scenario of July 1890, where he supposedly is suicidal? You need to like, if you take the circumstances of July 1890, it's just that his brother thinks of changing jobs. It's just that his brother thinks of, yeah, it's basically just that. And then you say, is that a bigger crisis than this? I don't think so. I mean, to me, it's pretty obvious, but I don't know what you guys think. Robbie Robbins says, no, he deals with each hurdle as they come along. And there are lots of hurdles. There are lots. I mean, Van Gogh could probably become a champion, an Olympic champion hurdler in the symbolic sense. Okay, so let's go back to the letter. It says, once again, if my staying in The Hague should bother anyone, please say so frankly. I'm only too happy to yield on all matters concerning a home or the like. So he's kind of just saying to Theo, you're going to be paying for where I'm staying. So, you know what, start checking out the classifieds, and anywhere you want me to live, you can start sorting that out. Thanks a lot, Theo. He says, by the way, Theo, I need a studio. I need a living room and a bedroom. And although I don't really mind if it's in The Hague or anywhere else, I'll be happy to go anywhere. Then he says it must all be discussed quite differently from, for example, the way father did on the Geel occasion. That was scandalous. Should it be possible for me to have, say, 50 francs a month this year? Although my work still isn't saleable yet, it is the foundation on which I shall be able to build later on. Well, that's not going to work out so well. So he's trying to kind of almost formalize things. He's like, Theo, remember you were in this position. Remember this. Remember that. By the way, you're going to be paying for where I'm staying. So can you sort that out? And by the way, I need 50 francs a month. Thanks, brother. Then he says, then I shall get down to business with a will and in good heart, because I shall at least know then that I shan't be lacking the barest necessities I require for my work. My daily bread, a home, drawing materials, I shall be able to work then. Well, those bare necessities, Theo's going to be paying for. Theo's going to be paying for his daily bread, literally. Theo's going to be paying for his home, literally. Theo's going to be paying for drawing materials, literally. Then he says, were I to be told for certain that you are withdrawing your support, and that in a sense is the subtext to this entire letter and this entire time of his life, is Theo going to be withdrawing his support? Is Theo going to keep paying my way? And the answer is yes, but not if you get married. Faticus, good to see you here. Ricardo says, it seems Vincent lives by obligation and Theo wants him to be more spontaneous. Okay, so he says, if you withdraw your support, I will be rendered powerless. Well, that is absolutely true. If Theo doesn't help him, Van Gogh is totally screwed, right? That's the reality here. In fact, the reality is that Vincent has absolutely no power. He's got a little bit of power in the written word, but it's really up to Theo to decide what he's going to do. And you can already tell that Theo's not terribly happy with what's going on. Then he says, with the best will in the world, my hand would become paralyzed. Everything would indeed be dreadful. Just kind of saying, he's in a way coercing his brother. He's saying, if you don't pay, if you withdraw your support, I will not be able to draw anymore. Then I'm going to be an even bigger burden on you. Everything would be terrible. What satisfaction would that give you or anyone else? I should become downhearted, and it would go hard with Christine and the child. You may think it's going too far to suppose you're capable of doing anything like that, but such things can happen. If this dreadful fate has to befall me, so be it. Though it hangs over my head, I can say nothing other than I've pledged Christine my troth, and she has pledged me hers, and we do not have it in us to break this pledge. So he's basically sort of sketching out the worst case scenario here, which is if Theo doesn't support him, he says, well, I'll be downhearted. Then he says, and yet confounded, what's happening? And what sort of times do we live in? Wake up, Theo. Don't let them confuse you or sway you with their Jesuitisms. Do I deserve being left in the lurch by you because I've helped a pregnant woman and will not send her back onto the streets? Is that a capital offense? Nisi, good to see you here. And thanks for that. Nisi says, hello, Nick and chat. Family visiting and must watch the replay. Enjoy everyone and have a beautiful Van Gogh Sunday. Thank you for your insight into these beautiful letters, Nick. Hello to Timmy. Until next time, Nisi. Nisi, I hope you have a wonderful time with your family and really appreciate that. Thanks a lot. Thanks for that. So that's quite intense from Van Gogh to look at the exclamation marks and the question marks, right? And is just almost saying, don't pay attention to what other people are saying or thinking. Don't leave me in the lurch. Then he says, goodbye, my dear fellow, but before you strike at me and chop off my head, and Christine and the child's as well, sleep on it once more. But again, if it has to be, then in God's name, off with my head, though preferably not. I still need it for drawing. So there's a little bit of humor there, right? Ever yours, Vincent. Then he says, P.S. Christine and the child won't be able to pose headless either. So a little bit of lightheartedness there. Quite a long letter, this, wasn't it? And so after this really long letter, we go to the same day again, another letter. Dear Theo, if I'm to succeed in giving you further insight into what I've already written you about, you must understand the root of it. And I must not put my visit to Amsterdam in a better light than it really was. But I begin by begging you not to think me impertinent when I contradict you. So he's obviously read Theo's letter and he's saying, you know what? Actually, it's like this. And he says, and before all this, I must thank you most kindly for the enclosed 50 francs. So even though Theo's not terribly happy, he still sends him money. And Vincent kind of says, thanks for the money, but I'm now going to argue with what you said, right? He says, it'll be no use if I don't put it strongly. I would remain silent if you wanted me to give in to you, but I don't think you do. And perhaps you yourself will not think it unnatural that some things in life are less developed in you than your business sense, which I fully consider twice as good as mine. And I shall not readily risk telling you this, or that it is not so. Now, I must say, there's something Shakespearean about the skill in which Van Gogh um, insults his brother, right? So he says to his brother, um, that his brother's business sense is twice as good as his, right? That's the compliment. But within the compliment is kind of the insult where he says, I think you want me not to remain silent. And I'm now going to tell you something that's not a compliment, kind of thing. And he says, I shall not readily risk telling you this or that. That is not so. On the contrary, especially when you explain things to me, I often feel you know better than I. So again, he's sort of buttering his brother up, saying, you know what, you're cleverer than me, you've got better business savvy, but I'm about to contradict you in a strong way. Then he says, on the other hand, when it comes to love, I'm often astonished at the way you think, right? And think about just how crazy that statement is coming from him in this situation. I mean, we are sitting here and we're thinking it is astonishing what he's doing and what he's trying to do, right? And it's just kind of crazy, isn't it? I'm often astonished at the way you think. Well, that's what we think about you, Vincent. For your last letter has given me more food for thought than perhaps you realize. I think my mistake and the real reason for being refused is this. When one is without money, of course one is of no account. So it was a mistake and short-sightedness on my part to take what Mauve said literally, or to suppose for a moment that Tearstig would remember that I've had so much trouble already. At present, money is what the right of the strongest used to be. To contradict a person is fatal, and if one does, the reaction is not that the other part is made to reflect, but that one gets a blow with the fist. That is to say, in the form of, I will not buy from him again, or I will not help him again. This being so, I risk my head when I contradict you, but Theo, I don't know how I could do otherwise. So this is Vincent standing up for himself, and even though he risks losing his brother's um, contributions, his brother's charity, he's nevertheless brave enough to take that risk, right? That is the reason given by the experts that Vincent committed suicide 8 years later, is that there was a risk that his brother wouldn't be able to look after him if his brother changed jobs, right? Yuri is in this exact situation and he's prepared to sort of take that risk by saying, you know what, I'm going to disagree with you. Even if you don't give me money, I'm going to insist on marrying this person, right? He says, you know the circumstances and know that my life or death depends on your help. It's quite a statement to make. But I'm between two fires. If I reply to your letter, yes, Theo, you are right, I will give up Christine, then first I tell a lie in agreeing with you, and second, I commit myself to doing a vile thing. If I contradict you and you act like Tearstig and Mauve, it will cost me my head, so to speak. Well, for heaven's sake, off with my head if that's the way it has to be. The other thing is even worse. So all of these letters, all of these statements is Vincent's appeal. Don't cut me off. Don't abandon me. Please keep supporting me. Please let me have this thing that I really want. I want to be married. Please look after me. Then he says, here is a short memorandum clearly explaining a few things to which I think may possibly cause you to withdraw your help. Now, what I want to kind of just be clear on is Vincent van Gogh is supposed to be this troubled, tragic, mentally ill, even insane madman, right? And look at just how clearly he expresses himself in the midst of emotional crisis, in the midst of a devastating threat that is hanging over him like the sword of Damocles, right? Look at how succinct he is in making a case for himself, right? Look at the language that he uses. Here's a short memorandum clearly explaining a few things which Theo may be using to rationalize why he's going to act a certain way. Now he's making a case for why Theo shouldn't do that. I mean, it's quite astonishing how lucid he is and how succinctly he is expressing himself. Do you agree with that? Then he says, but to conceal them so as not to lose your help seems to me an underhanded thing to do, and I would rather risk the worst. If I succeed in making you understand what I think you don't yet understand, then Christine, her child, and myself will be safe. And in order to accomplish this, I must risk saying what I'm going to say. So what is really fascinating now is we now go into a bit of backstory. Let's just bring myself back up here. So what we go into now that's really fascinating is we go into a bit of backstory dealing with what happened with Kivos. So this is where Vincent actually reveals a bit more around what actually happened, why things didn't work out. And something that comes out now in this narrative is Kivos's brother actually acted like an intermediary and basically said the following. I'm jumping a little bit ahead, but basically said to Vincent, the only way this is going to happen is if you produce some cash. The only way that you have a hope in hell of seeing my sister is if you suddenly show us the money, right? And as simplistic as that sounds, you might think, no, 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 I don't think that sounds right. We're going to go through the letter now. Tell me I'm wrong in the way that I've expressed it. So he says, to express my feelings for Key, I said resolutely, she and no other. Now, in a way, the Van Gogh family kind of can take some comfort out of the fact that he was so ardent, he was so passionate, he was so determined, he was so sure of himself. And then he didn't end up marrying Kibos. And so they could, in their hearts and in their minds, think, isn't this Kibos part two? And it was, right? And then he says, and her no, never, never was not strong enough to make me give her up. I still had hope, and my love remained, notwithstanding this refusal, which I thought was like a piece of ice that would melt. But I could find no rest. The strain became unbearable because she was always silent, and I never received a word in answer. Then he says, then I went to Amsterdam. There they told me, when you are in the house, Key leaves it. She answers, certainly not him, to your she and no other. Your persistence is disgusting. I put my hand in the flame of the lamp and said, let me see her for as long as I can keep my hand in the flame, no matter what, no matter that later Teerstig may have looked at my hand. But they blew out the lamp, I believe, and said, you shall not see her. And thereafter, I also had a discussion with her brother. There it comes out. He said, officially or unofficially, that only money would be able to achieve something here. That's quite a big thing. So he has a discussion with Kivos's brother, and he's basically told that the law is laid down. The only way you're going to have a hope with my sister is if you can show us the money, right? Only money would be able to achieve something here. Unofficially or unofficially, I find it mean in both cases. When I left Amsterdam, I had a feeling as if I'd been on a slave market. And so he obviously felt very undone. He felt humiliated. He felt emasculated, but he also was exposed as a kind of a loser, someone who doesn't have a job, who doesn't have money, who isn't an eligible bachelor, who, despite all the feelings in the world, isn't going to get his way. And in that power struggle, he loses, right? Then he says, well, it was too much for me, especially when they spoke of my wanting to coerce her. And I felt that the crushing things they said to me were unanswerable, and that my she and no other had been killed. Then, not at once, but very soon, I felt that love die within me, a void, an infinite void that came in its stead. Now, Robbie Robbins says here, he is very articulate. It definitely is. This is very, very well articulated for someone who is in the midst of this, right? So he goes on to say that he felt a void, an infinite void. He's talking about when he sort of accepted, when he realized, when he knew that this love was doomed, when he kind of accepted that it was over. He felt this void. I think a lot of us have experienced that horrible feeling of emptiness, of abandonment, of rejection, that horrible, naked, painful feeling. And he follows it up by saying, I believe in God. I did not doubt the power of love, but then I felt something like, my God, why hast thou forsaken me? And everything became a blank. I thought, have I been deceiving myself? And then he says, oh God, there is no God. This is really, really profound. This is someone who's been struck so deeply into his soul that his beliefs, his identity is shaken, but also to the extent that his beliefs are also irrevocably changed. Because bear in mind, after this, he's sort of doesn't seem to. Timmy, I think I'm going to put you down. Or are you going to? Okay. So you can see that what he experienced was very, very painful, but you can also see that he tried to find a way out of that pain quite quickly. And the way he did was with seeing. So he feels this devastating loss. He feels, as I say, humiliated, emasculated, broken. And then he tries to seek relief from that. I don't think he went to I don't think he went to scene to like, well, I can't marry you, I'll marry you. I think he just sought relief in the moment, and then that evolved into this whole situation, right? Then he talks about that cold, terrible reception in Amsterdam was too much for me. My eyes were opened at last. So he's referring to that whole episode as a major milestone on his emotional journey. It's a moment of truth, an authentic moment where, to an extent, his um, inadequacy, his powerlessness, his potential was sort of exposed, right? To me, I'm going to let you go down here. Okay, there you go. Sorry, boy. Okay. Then he says, enough. Then Mauve diverted and encouraged me. So he's really taking us through that sort of backstory. And he says, I threw myself into my work with all my strength. And that is a kind of an indication of how he copes with emotional trauma. How does Vincent cope with emotional trauma? The answer is that he works like hell. That is exactly what he did in the asylum. That's also what he did in Auvers-sur-Oise, is he threw himself into his work with all his strength. And if you think about it, it is quite a good coping strategy. You guys don't know this about me, but prior to me writing 100 books, I was in a relationship. It was probably for the 3 years preceding that, I was in a relationship that sort of unwound. And then at the end of that, I threw myself into work. And it took 100 books to sort of work through, work through everything I had to say. Although it's not like just one thing. It wasn't like just that relationship was driving me. But I can understand what he's talking about, where that is a relief and a practical and what's the word? A positive way to focus, let's say, negative energy. Also, a turning in a way a negative into a positive, right? But the point is that he is able to do that, and he does it here, and he also did it when he was in Auvers, right? So, in other words, when he is discouraged, a sign that he is dealing with it positively is he's working with all his strength. A sign that something's wrong is if he's not working with all his strength, if he's not painting, then you've got a problem. And that is why I say you can see this from a mile away that he didn't commit suicide, because if he was suicidal, his output would have started petering out, would have started fizzling. He would have just lost the interest in painting. And one of the biggest indicators that he wasn't suicidal was his very last letter to Theo, was asking for an unusually large order of paints and canvases. That is an indication that in the future I expect to be painting. In the future I expect to be my output to be even higher than it is now. Not Theo, don't send me any more paints. Don't, I don't want to be a bigger burden on you, kind of thing. Robbie Robbins says, I sometimes clean and tidy rapidly when I'm furious. I think you're not the only one. Then he says, then towards the end of January, after I'd been thrown over by Mauve and had been ill for a few days, I met Christine. Theo, you say that if I'd really loved Key, I shouldn't have done this. I must say, it's not a bad argument. It's not a bad argument to say, Cheapers, you seem so ardent about Key, and then the next thing you, with another woman, you want to marry a totally different woman. What's going on? And then this is his answer to that. He says, "But do you understand better now that I couldn't go any further after what happened in Amsterdam? Should I have despaired then? Why should an honest man despair? I'm no criminal. I didn't deserve to be treated in such an inhuman way. Well, what can they do this time? It's true that they got the best of me. They thwarted me there in Amsterdam, but I'm not asking their advice anymore now. And being of age, I ask you, am I free to marry? Yes or no? Am I free to put on a workman's clothes and live like a workman? Yes or no? Whom am I responsible to? Who will try to force me? To hell with anyone who wants to hinder me." So he's being pretty clear on his feelings, isn't he? He says, "You see, Theo, I've had enough of it all. Think it over and you will understand. Is my path less straight because somebody says you have gone astray?" CM, not quite sure who CM is. It might be Mauve. Always talks about the right path too, just like Tierstick and the clergyman. But Mauve also calls De Grue a bad character. So in the future, I shall let him talk. My ears are tired of it. To forget, I lie down in the sand by an old tree trunk and make a drawing of it. Have you noticed that Van Gogh hasn't been really speaking at all in the last letter or two about what he's painting or drawing? All of this is about his feelings. All of this is about his love life, right? Hello, hello. So he goes on to say, "This soothes me." Hang on, he says, "In a linen smock, smoking a pipe and looking at the deep blue sky, or at the moss or the grass. This soothes me." He's basically saying, I get a bit of relief and joy in nature. And then he says, "And I feel just as calm, for instance, when Christine or a mother is posing." So it seems even Christine's mother is in the picture, literally. Uh, and I estimate the proportions and try to suggest the body with its long undulating lines under the folds of a black dress. Then I'm 1,000 miles away from Mauve, Tierstig, not quite sure. I think JPS is Kivos's father, Stricker, and much happier. But alas, then the worries come, and I must either talk or write about money, and then it all begins anew. Then I think Tierstig and Mo would do so much better if they didn't bother about my path, but encourage my drawing. You will say Mauve does, but listen to why his order has not been filled as yet. Mauve said to me, "That uncle of yours has only given this order because he was at your studio once, but you must understand that he doesn't mean anything, and you will be the first and last, and then nobody will take an interest in you." So this is really quite an incredible statement. Mauve is basically saying to Vincent that he doesn't really have a hope of selling his art. He's saying the only reason you got this order from your uncle is because he went to your studio once and he said nothing's going to come after this. And Mauve is actually absolutely right. And Vincent can't face this. Robbie Robbins says, "I wonder what Christine's mother thought of Vincent." Yeah, good question. Moby is actually absolutely right that after these orders that came from the family, he never got any other sort of orders or interest. It was almost like a sympathy order, right? Does that make sense? I mean, you are truly making it as an artist when strangers, people who don't know you, start to purchase your work, right? Then he goes on to say, you must know, Theo, that I cannot stand such things. So he's just saying the fact that Mauve said to me that your uncle just bought this kind of out of sympathy, this really makes Vincent furious. You can understand that, but nevertheless, Mauve does turn out to be right about it. Then he says, if such things are said, my hand drops as if paralyzed. So you can see how you can't actually say to Van Gogh, dude, you've got a long way to go, because he's just going to, he might just stop painting. So you kind of got to just let him go his own way. Ricardo Ortiz says his stamina to thoroughly pen down the problems that haunt him show he's a kind person to let things go. Yeah, I must say that's a really good point. Um, it shows tremendous stamina to write these long, long letters going into very deep places. Um, it definitely does show a lot of stamina in that sense. It's not just one long letter, it's long letter after long letter after long letter after long letter. Then he says, especially as Mauve has already said something about conventions, I believe. I've done 12 drawings for Mauve for 30 guilders. That is 250 guilders apiece. It was a difficult job. There was more than 30 guilders worth of work in it, and I don't deserve having to consider it charity or something like it. I had already put a lot of effort into the 6 others. I made the studies for them, and there it stopped. The effort over the new ones has already been made, so it is not laziness, but I am paralyzed. I reason with myself I won't pay any attention to it, but I'm nervous, and such a thing does not go away, but comes back when I try my hand at them again. So then I must steer another course and begin another work. I don't understand Merv. It would have been kind of him never to have meddled with me. What do you advise me to do? Make the drawings for Mauve or not? I really don't know what to do. There used to be better feeling among painters. Now they try to devour each other and are big personages who have villas and scheme to get ahead. I would rather be on the Geest or in any grey, muddy and gloomy valley. There I am never bored. So I say, there's no place for me. I won't go there anymore. Thank God I have my work, but instead of earning money by it, I need money to be able to work. So that is the difficulty. When in a year, or I don't know how long, I shall be able to draw that Geest or any other street as I see it, with those figures of old women, workmen, girls, then Tierstig, etc., will be very kind. But then they will hear me thunder, go to hell, and I shall say, you deserted me when I was in trouble, friend. I don't know you. Go away. You're standing in my light. Dear me, why should I be afraid? What do I care about Tierstig's unsaleable or without charm? So obviously Tierstig, who's an art dealer, said, Vincent, you know what is wrong with your art? It just lacks charm. It's not saleable. It's not good enough. And I've got to agree. Some of his early works are quite sort of bland and clumsy and empty in a way. Then he says, whenever I feel depressed, I look at the Diggers by Mallet and Les Blancs des Pauvres by De Grue. And then Tierstig becomes so small, so insignificant, and all that drivel of his becomes so foolish that my spirits rise and I light my pipe and start drawing again. But if ever a civilized person should cross my path at such a moment, he might hear things which would sober him up. You will ask me, Theo, if these things are also applicable to you. My answer is, Theo, who has given me bread and helped me, I think you did. So it certainly is not applicable to you. But sometimes the thought occurs to me, why isn't Theo a painter? Will that civilization ever begin to bore him? Won't he later regret that he has not left civilization for what it is worth, and has not learned a handicraft, taken a wife, and put on the painter's smock? But there may be reasons for it which I cannot appreciate. I don't know whether you have learned the ABC of love. Do you think that pretentious of me? What I mean is, one feels best what love is when sitting by a sick bed, sometimes without any money in one's pocket. It is no gathering of strawberries in spring that lasts only a few days, and most of the months are grey and gloomy. But in that gloom, one learns something new. Sometimes I think you know it, and sometimes I think he does not. I want to go through the joys and sorrows of domestic life in order to paint it from my own experience. When I came back from Amsterdam, I felt that my love, so true, so honest and strong, had literally been killed. But after death, there is resurrection, resurgam. Then I found Christine. There was no time to hesitate or to defer. I had to act. If I do not marry her, it would have been kinder of me to have left her alone. But a chasm will be opened by this step. I decidedly lower myself, as they say. But it isn't forbidden. It isn't wrong, though the world says so. I live as a laborer. It suits me. I wanted to before, but I couldn't carry it out then. I hope that you will continue to stretch your hand across the chasm to me. I mentioned 150 francs a month. You said that I should need more. Wait a minute. My average expenses have never exceeded 100 francs a month since I left Goupil, except when I had to travel. And at first I had 30 guilders at Goupil's and later 100 francs a month. It's true that during these last months my expenses have been higher, but I had to set up housekeeping, and I ask you, were these expenses unreasonable or extravagant, especially if you know what those expenses included, and how often in those long years did I have much less than 100 francs? And if I sometimes had traveling expenses, haven't I learned languages and developed my mind? Is that money thrown away? Now I want to lay a straight path for my feet. If I postpone marriage, there is something crooked in my position which is repulsive to me. She and I will skimp and be as frugal as possible if only we can marry. I'm 30 years old, so there he's making it absolutely clear. I'm 30 years old and she's 32, so we are no longer children. As to her mother and her child, the latter takes away all strain from her, or all stain from her. I respect a woman who is a mother and I don't ask about her past. I'm glad that she has a child. It gives her exactly the experience she needs. You actually kind of get a sense that he's not only got to look after her and the child that she's about to bear and her child, but even her mother. He says her mother is very energetic and deserves a medal because she has supported a family of 8 children for years. She doesn't want to be a dependent. She makes her living as a charwoman. I think a charwoman is a domestic worker. I'm writing you late at night. Now, just imagine Van Gogh. This isn't just a letter. He actually had to write it down, by hand. And just think about how long it took to write this letter down by hand. Probably more than an hour, right? A long, long time that he's scribbling and scratching on paper somewhere in Holland, somewhere in The Hague, somewhere in time, right? And all of that time, all of that effort, all of those emotions are ultimately for nothing because she's going to abandon him. Then he says, Christine is not well, and the time for her to go to Leyden is at hand. You must excuse me if this letter is written badly, as I'm very tired. But after receiving your letter, I wanted to write at once. The refusal in Amsterdam was so decisive, I was dismissed so cavalierly, that it would have been foolish to go on any longer. But ought I to have despaired then, jumped into the water or something? I think when he mentions that jumped into the water, I think he's referring to suicide because I don't know if you guys know the scene would ultimately take her life that way by walking into a river. Anyway, he says, I should have if I'd been a wicked man. I've started a new life not purposely, but because I had a chance to begin anew and did not refuse it. But now it's different, and Christine and I understand each other better. We don't have to pay attention to what people say. Of course, we don't pretend to maintain any social standing. Familiar as I am with the prejudices of the world, I know that what I have to do is retire from the sphere of my own class, which cast me out long time ago anyhow. But that's all they can do, and they can't go any further. Maybe I will wait a while before we set up housekeeping together anyway, because the circumstances are too difficult. But if I marry, I will do it quietly, without giving notice to anyone. If any remarks are made, I shall not pay attention to them. And this is also quite interesting. Seen is a Roman Catholic and the Van Goghs are Protestants. Also, a lot of France and also Auvers-sur-Oise, especially the village where Van Gogh died, was also very Roman Catholic. And you've got to try and remember how important that aspect is back in time. During this time, the Roman Catholics didn't really get along with the Protestants, like in a really severe way. I can tell you a lot of people who came to South Africa came here because they felt oppressed by the Roman Catholics. A lot of people who came here because they were like, I believe that in terms of Christianity, and I'm not being allowed to believe that. So stuff you, I'm going to go to another country and practice my faith the way I want to do it, right? So this is a very real thing that is culturally that is taking place over here. And to make things even more difficult, this woman that he's in love with is a Roman Catholic, whereas his father is a Protestant. He says the wedding will be even simpler, for then, of course, the church is out of the question. Neither she nor I want to have anything to do with it. You will say, this is putting it bluntly, I only know one thing, drawing, and I only know one thing, drawing, and she only has one regular job, posing. That's definitely quite funny. Yeah, it's definitely quite a funny thing. So he's saying that Scene's job, and he's kind of imposing it on her. Scene's job is posing. She's going to be doing that for the rest of her life. I wish it were possible to take the house next to this. It is exactly the right size. Now, he's mentioned this before, he's mentioning it again. And of course, it's up to Theo to decide to acquire this house for his brother. Do you think he's going to do that? And so, once again, in so many respects, the art, this woman, and also this house, Van Gogh has got these really unrealistic expectations. Instead of living in this house next door, he's going to shortly be living with his parents again in Newnan. Not quite what he had in mind, is it? He says, will it be possible, even if I had only a hole to live in, I would rather have a crust of bread in my own home, however poor it might be, than live without marrying her. Now, where he says, even if I had only a hole to live in, one wonders whether he's read The Hobbit, which starts off, in a hole in the ground, dot, dot, dot. Then he goes on to say, she knows what poverty is, so do I. Poverty has advantages and disadvantages, yet we shall risk it in spite of poverty. Fishermen know that the sea is dangerous and the storm terrible, but they've never found these dangers sufficient to keep them ashore. They leave that philosophy to those who like it. Let the storm rise, the night descend. Which is worse, danger or the fear of danger? Personally, I prefer reality, the danger itself. Quite interesting words there. You kind of get the sense that he understands that he has been on a kind of vacation from reality for quite a while. Then he says, adieu, Theo. It is late. Don't be angry because of my letter. I'm tired, and yet I wanted to write. I wish you could understand it all and that I could express myself in a clearer and gentler way. But don't be offended by it, and believe me, ever yours, Vincent. Then there's a postscript that also goes on for quite a while. He says, I believe, or rather it begins to dawn on me, that there might be a shadow of a chance that the thought Theo will withdraw his help if I contradict him is perhaps quite unnecessary. But Theo, I've seen such things happen so often that I shouldn't think less of you and shouldn't be angry with you if you did, because I would think he doesn't know any better. They all act like that from thoughtlessness, not malice. If I may keep your help, it would be something quite unexpected, good luck which I had not counted on, for I've lived with this terrible thought a long time, and Christine too, because I always told her, lass, I fear there will come a time when I shall be left quite without means. Now you can almost imagine that Vincent saying to Scene, Um, while I'm a little bit worried that I'm not going to have any money, Scene's thinking, I don't think this is going to work, right? Every time Vincent kind of shares how he actually feels and what is really going on, she's probably thinking, this is not a good option for me, right? Then he says, but I did not tell it to you before the right moment had arrived. If you let me keep your help, that would be a relief, a blessing so unexpected, so unhoped for, that it would quite upset me with joy. Even now, I dare not think of it, and I put away the thought with all my strength. Do you notice how there's almost something Shakespearean in how he addresses his brother on this sort of difficult topic? What I experienced last winter at Mauve's hands has been a lesson to me. It has kept me prepared for the worst. A death sentence from you, namely that you stop your help. So obviously, Mauve has been critical of his brother, of Theo helping Vincent, given what Theo has been up to, right? And he literally thinks of it as a death sentence at this point. Then he says, you will say, but the help hasn't stopped. But I always receive it with certain reservations, thinking he doesn't know yet what he will know one day, and I shall have no rest until the crisis comes, and I am prepared for the worst. Now the crisis has come, and I cannot decide. I dare not hope yet. I said to Christine, I shall be able to help you until you go to Leyden. I don't know how you will find me, with or without bread, when you come back from Leyden, but I will share what I have with you and the child. So he's saying to her, when you go to hospital, when you come back, you might find that things have changed, that I can't actually look after you. Susan, good to see you here. I think, Susan, I'll probably be on for another half an hour. So hopefully that'll be, something for you to watch for now. So he goes on to say, Christine does not know any details, nor does she ask for them, but she knows I shall be frank with her, and she wants to stay with me, quan bin miem. I guess that means regardless. Until now, I've always thought it probable that you would drop me as soon as you knew everything. So I've lived from day to day with a dark fear of the worst, which I don't dare think myself free of yet. I've also worked from day to day, not daring to order more drawing or painting materials than I could pay for, not daring to undertake any painting, not daring to push on, as I would have if I could have counted on Mauve's and Tearstick's sympathy. I thought that through their kindness I thought that though their kindness was superficial, their unkindness was more deeply rooted. In short, I took Mauve's words, that's all over, seriously. Not when he said them, for then my face showed nothing and I braved it, like the Indians who say it doesn't hurt when they are being tortured. But since I threw the plaster cast into the coal bin, he wrote me, I won't have anything to do with you for 2 months. Well, personally, I always thought I can't expect anything from Mauve or Tearstick, and I shall thank God if Theo will continue to send me what's necessary until I can bring Christine safely to Leyden. Then I shall explain it to him and say, stop this. Stop. This is what I've done. Do you understand it? I'm prepared for the worst. What's it to be? Speak plainly. Just kind of saying to his brother, what is your decision? Are you going to support me or not? So 2 days later, he writes the following letter. Dear Theo, because Christine suffered from cramps, I thought it would be a good thing for her to go to Leyden once more to find out exactly how things are. She has been there and has come back already. Thank God she is all right. But as you know, in March she had an operation and has now been examined again. She needs care and must continue to eat strengthening food and also have some more baths if possible. But there are no complications and there's every chance she will pull through. In March, the professor could not tell exactly when she would be confined, but he thought it would be the end of May or the beginning of June. Now he says it will probably be late in June. This time he asked her many questions about whom she was living with, and from what he said about it, I now know for sure what I'd guessed, that she would die if she had to walk the streets again. And when I met her this winter, it was only just in time to give her the help she needed. So as I wrote to you, I wouldn't think of leaving her under the circumstances. It would be a mean trick. The doctor found her better than in March. The child is alive and has given her some instructions about food, etc., so that I do not have to act in the dark. The baby's clothes are also ready, of course, the very simplest. I'm not living in a castle in the air or in a dream, but in plain reality, where one must act with firmness. It's quite an interesting comment he makes there. I'm not living in a castle in the air or in a dream, but in plain reality. Do you think that's true? I think I'm going to make that a poll. Sorry, I'm just putting it up there, but it says it's too long, so I'm just trying to shorten it. It's still too long by one letter. Okay, there we go. Ask your community. There it is. Okay. Then he says, under the circumstances, I know no better way for either of us than marrying her. As I wrote to you, the kind tone of your letter of May 13 was more than I expected. So there is some indication of what Theo said to him, that he said at least the tone of his letter was kind. And he's saying that I don't have any illusions. He said, I expected that you would quite disapprove of my behavior and would withdraw your help. So I think one can kind of ask the question, why is Theo supporting him? Why is Theo helping him? I think it could be that his parents are concerned that, remember, Van Gogh has left home and there's been a lot of upset there. So to some extent, Theo is acting, I think, on behalf of their mother and their father. That's one part of it. I think the other part of it is, I think Theo has been a bit of a naughty boy in certain respects as well, and his brother has helped him a lot, and he is just not. He's trying to reserve judgment, and so he's giving him money every time. But I think he's also thinking, the fact that I'm giving you money now doesn't mean that I support what you want to do. We'll cross that bridge when we come to it, right? I think there is kind of a sense that Vincent is acting crazy, Vincent's being irrational, and he needs to come to his senses. And so we're not going to react in terms of what he's saying. We'll sort of let it pass for now, and things will resolve themselves, which ultimately they do. Now, I want you again to think about that, because a lot of families have that strategy. A lot of families say, I know how you think, I know how intense you get about certain things. So in order not to escalate things, we're not going to indulge you in terms of the terms that you are stating, because we know we have another end result in mind, but we'll get to that when we get to that. Does that make sense? And so that family culture is often something that you realize, well, that is how difficulties and problems are dealt with, which is you let them pass. How can I put it? They come up and then you allow them to sort of wash for a while, and then they find like a new equilibrium, if that makes sense. Wow, Ricardo, thanks very much. And Susan, thank you. Thanks very much for that. So he goes on to say, so this obviously is reaction to Theo's letter. He says, I had no illusions and expected that you would quite disapprove of my behavior and you would withdraw your help. And even now, I hardly dare hope that your help will continue, because I know that in the eyes of most people in your position, such an act is a capital crime punishable by a sort of banishment. So I'm longing very much for your next letter, also to hear if you have received the drawings. So obviously he has, there's been some output within all of this drama. He says, but I have no illusions about it. Only I would not be sincere if I said anything to you other than that it is my decided intention to marry her as soon as possible. So, that intention is expressed and repeated over and over again. I want to marry her. I want to marry her. I'm going to marry her. I'm going to marry her. I need another house. I need a place to stay. Or are you going to keep paying for everything, right? Then he says, the reasons you give are not strong enough to make me give it up. So Theo is actually trying to convince him to change his mind. And he basically just says, sorry, your arguments aren't strong enough. Again, it's almost like this legal thing. It's almost like a court case where he's presenting his arguments for why things should be a certain way, and Theo's presenting his counter arguments, right? Then he says, so your reasons aren't strong enough, although there's a great deal of truth in some of your remarks, especially when considered by themselves. Now, again, just think about how civilized this discussion is. I mean, it's really, I mean, if you think about how, I don't want to say uncivilized, but if you think about how rash the behavior is, think about how civilized the discussion around the rash behavior is. Quite remarkable. Then he says, and now to tell you the truth, I really need some more money this month. Though I paid for the bread up to the 1st of June and laid in some provisions like coffee. Of course, since you tell me nothing's wrong as I imagined, I will certainly finish the order for Mauve. I've already made the studies. However, it will take me about 3 weeks to get those 6 drawings. For in order to get 6 good ones, so this is the first time he's really talking about drawing in quite a few paragraphs. He says, it will take me about 3 weeks to get those 6 drawings. For in order to get 6 good ones, I shall have to make more than 6 in addition to the work I've already done. I do not know how much I shall get for them, but I shall do my best. So I hope I shall get the money in June. If there's some good in my behavior toward Christine after all, it is more to your credit than to mine, as I was and am only the instrument. Without your help, I should have been powerless. The money you sent has helped me with my drawing, and moreover, up to now, it has saved Christine's and the child's lives. But in a sense, it would be my fault if you took it as a breach of confidence. I hope you won't. Ever yours, Vincent. So now it is quite a big jump from the 16th to the 23rd. And yeah, we at last see some more artworks, although some of these we've seen before. Don't know if we've seen this one before. Kind of looks familiar. The figure doesn't look familiar, but the setup, if you look at this, does sort of look familiar. If you look at this part, and then you look at this, it's the same, isn't it? This part over here, isn't that the same as this over there? See, there are also plants over there. Ricardus is very civilized. I must say, when I look at this picture, it kind of brings back when I stayed in Amsterdam, in a very modern part of it, but the way that the houses kind of are back to back with other houses reminded me a bit of that. Okay, so this one's actually titled Scene's Mother's House. Quite interesting. So this is quite a short letter, fortunately. Dear Theo, just a word in haste. Did you receive the drawings and my last letter? I mean the portfolio containing the large sorrow and the roots, etc. I hear that Uncle Vincent is in Paris. I hope you did not speak to him about the matter in question. So he's kind of asking Theo to be discreet. Don't talk about my business to other family members, right? Of course, they would consider it immoral or even worse. All right, they can chat about it as much as they like, as long as I don't have to listen to it or be present. Yesterday, I received a kind letter from father and mother, right? The first time we really heard them in a while, and you've got to be wondering whether in all of these letters, in all of this correspondence between Vincent and Theo, hasn't Theo kind of sent a letter to their parents saying something or other? Um, he may have been explicit and transparent, or he may have just said, I'm a little bit worried about Vincent, right? Prompting this letter from their parents, right? Then he says, it would please me very much if only I could believe that this feeling would continue. But when I speak to them about the affair with Christine, which he hasn't done yet, so they don't know about it as far as he knows, but he's now dreading that. He's now, I'm going to have to tell them about this, right? He says, I shall do that in 3 weeks when she has gone to Leyden and I have the time to spare, but not before. Then I repeat, will they still speak kindly when they know all this? 3 question marks. Well, that's the question. But my marriage does not depend on them, and you know well enough what I think in this matter, and that as I do nothing unlawful, and as I doubt their competence to judge moral affairs, their refusal would certainly grieve me, but I would not stop or give it would not stop me or give me pause. Now, again, it sort of puts things into perspective where you think he's worried about what they think, but is very assertive and very confident. You know, where he says, um, my marriage does not depend on them. And he says, their refusal would grieve me, but it would not stop me or give me pause. Vincent, do you realize that you're going to be living with them quite soon, like in about a year? So, yeah, it is going to stop you, kind of thing. So Vincent can be quite assertive. He can sound quite intense and the opposite of being pathetic, but the reality is his situation is quite grave. He goes on to say, I am again busy with the drawings for Mo, but will they please him? Perhaps not. I can conceive such drawings only as studies in perspective, and I'm doing them especially for practice. Now, can you imagine within this whole horror show of what's going on? Scene is not only pregnant, but she's sick. Um, and he might be losing money. He might be losing his benefactor and his brother. And all these people are disapproving of him. He's lost his friendship with Mauve and with Tearstick. And then probably the society that he's in probably sort of look down their nose at him and sneer at him, right? Within all of that, he's now got to try and produce good drawings, right? Then he says, during the last fortnight, I've been weak, not feeling well at all. I haven't given in to it and have gone on with my work. Now, that's not hypochondria. He is actually really sick. He's actually got gonorrhea, which I guess he's caught from Scene. And he says, but for instance, I've not been able to sleep for several nights and I've been feverish and nervous. But I've forced myself to keep going and working. Well, this is no time to get sick. I must go on. Now, think about this person who's actually sick, weak, not sleeping, and he's writing these long, long, long letters. And it's also all for nothing, right? Christine and her mother moved to a smaller house because when Christine returns from Leyden, she will come to live with me, wherever I may be, either in better or in worse circumstances. It is a little house with a courtyard. I hope to make a drawing of it this week, or we just had a look at it. Every day I see more clearly that the step I am taking opens an interesting field for drawing and getting models. This must also be taken into account when judging me. My profession allows me to undertake this marriage. I could not do it if I had another position. I'm longing for your letter and hope you will soon find time to write. I think knowing how things are, you could do much to straighten matters out. So I think he's still waiting for a straight answer and kind of a commitment from Theo about his position, about what he's prepared to do. He says, if you want more information, I will give it to you gladly and honestly. I repeat, knowing how things are, you will be able to moderate and change the opinions of those who have only a very imperfect notion of the matter, and so disagreements will be avoided. Again, when you think about what's really happening and you think about the tone of this conversation, it's a very civilized, articulate um, discussion dealing with something that's very seedy and strange, isn't it? He goes on to say, I spoke to no one but you about it for the sake of peace, and I shall not do it more than is absolutely necessary, as for instance to father when the time has come for Christine to go to Leyden. This is nothing I have sought, but it has come across my path and I have tackled it, and I am glad that it is something which demands action without hesitation or reflection. And I showed you the darker side of it first in the hope you later on that later on you won't think it's so bad. But I wish I knew what to do about the studio I wrote you about. I would be content with a smaller house, but I do not know of one more suitable. And I'm afraid that a less suitable one would not be cheaper, because then my work would suffer. So again, is pushing Theo to make available this house that is sort of next door that he likes and that he wants. He says, though I should save a few guilders a month by paying less rent, and perhaps I should say later, why did I let that studio go? Why didn't I try harder to get it? So he's quite pushy, isn't he? I long for your coming even more than for your letter, but I understand that perhaps I shall have to wait some time still. I'm not in the mood for writing, but one must do it sometimes. It would be good for you to send me something, for I'm rather hard up. So that's, send me some money. Well, at all events, write soon. I should especially like to know your opinion about the studio. It may be gone any day. Adieu. I repeat, don't deprive yourself, but if possible, send me something. Yours sincerely, Vincent. Oh, and let me know if you have received the drawings. So we go from this relatively short letter on the 23rd of May to the 27th of May. And here are a couple of other drawings which I think we've also seen before. I remember that one. And I mean, this one's in the previous, so I'm not quite sure what that's about. How long is this letter? Just want to see how long it's going to take us to get to June. I mean, we're almost there. May, May, May. And then a letter from the parents. So this is where I want to get to. So we're not too far away. Just see what comes after that. So let's just have a look at these pictures that he did. I think I've seen some of these as well. Yeah, I think I've seen that one. Have we seen this one? Fish drying barn. Have we seen this one? That's a new one. This actually looks like it could be near Scheveningen. You would imagine that this fish drying barn would be quite close to a beach, wouldn't you? Okay, so let's get here. Here's a postcard. I wonder if it's going to allow me to put it up. So here's a postcard written by Van Gogh. There's a stamp. Quite interesting seeing it in this context, isn't it? Okay, so we're almost there. Let's go back to, I think it's here, right? Just go back one more. Okay, how long is this letter? Not too long. Because I still want to get back to this. And I don't want to go too far over 2 hours. Well, we're almost at 2 hours. Okay. Susan, you're going to get a little bit of extra time here. I really wanted to stop at 2 hours, but it looks like we might go over to 2:30. Okay, dear Theo, today's Saturday. I had a visit from Rapard, and I'm glad he has been here. He asked after you many times. Among other things, he saw the drawings I'm doing for Mauve, and they seem to please him, especially a large one of the court or yard where Scene's mother lives. I wish you could see that one too, as well as another of a carpenter's shop and yard where little figures are busy. It is a great deal more complicated as to the perspective than the Laan van Meerdervoort I sent you. Laan is another word for avenue or road, right? Or lane. Um, it says it has given me trouble enough. You should know that at present I'm working out of doors as early as 4 o'clock in the morning. In the daytime, it is too difficult to work in the street because of the passers-by and the street urchins. This is also the finest moment to see the main outlines when everything is in tone. So he's getting up very early, like at the crack of dawn, and getting busy. But brother, it has been a hard fortnight for me. When I wrote you about the middle of May, I had only 350 guilders left after I'd paid the baker, and I've hardly had anything to eat but dry black bread with some coffee and Scene too, because we had bought some things for the baby and she had been to Leyden, etc. Now I have to pay the house rent for the 1st of June and have nothing, literally nothing. I hope you will send me something. A week ago, I felt very faint from continuous sleeplessness. So, again, this reference to not feeling well. Now that I've had some luck with a few drawings and the order for Mauve is almost finished, I have new courage and I'm a little calmer. But, brother, do write to me soon and deliver me from the landlord, for you know he won't be put off. Rapport's visit has cheered me up. He seems to work very hard. I've received 250 guilders from him because he saw a tear in one of the drawings and said, you must have that repaired. That's true, I said, but I haven't the money and the drawing must be sent off. Then he readily said that he would be pleased to give me it. It's interesting the way that's said, pleased to give me it instead of give it to me. Give it, to me. He would have given even more, but I wouldn't take it, and gave him a whole lot of wood engravings and a drawing in exchange. It was one for Mauve, and as it was the best of them all, the money to have it repaired was very welcome. That same drawing will perhaps be sold afterward for 50 guilders or so. Maybe, maybe not. And I didn't have the money to have a tear in it repaired. Well, I do hope, brother, that you do not think evil of Scene and me. She has learned to put up with my disagreeable side. Not sure about that. And in many ways, she understands me better than others. She's so willing to help me in everything. I can't tell you how useful she is to me. If I go into a rage once in a while, either about the posing or something else, she knows how to take it and has seen that it soon passes. Similarly, when I worry or grumble about something that does not succeed, she often knows how to quiet me. And that is something I'm not able to do for myself. She's very thrifty and contents herself with a piece of black bread without getting disheartened. And I do the same. If only we can both make both ends meet. I hope you have received the drawings I sent, I think about May 10. There were 25 of them in a portfolio. I've not heard from you about them. I do wish there were a few other people for whom I could do something on the same conditions as Mauve's, and especially that Mauve continues to order. For these drawings are much better than the first, and by I shall do them even better. And at that price, he certainly isn't getting a bad bargain. You know how it is, if you do not forsake me because of sin, then I shall be full of courage. And at 4 in the morning, I'm already at my work, so shall get through with a little sympathy from those who know me. I'm longing for your letter, a handshake in thought, but do write soon. And this is really the bottom line here, deliver me from the landlord, right? Okay, next letter, 28th of May. And this is to Rapard. Let's see how long this letter is. Quite a long letter. 138 Schenkweg, The Hague. Amis Rapard. Thanks. I've just now put my drawings into the package for Amsterdam. There are 7 in all. The big one of the 2 charity courts has become quite flat. Okay, so I'm not going to read through all of this. He does say, today I was at it quite early if I wanted to make another one like it, and went to the dunes to draw a fish drying barn. Like I said, I think he went to Scheveningen. Well, there it says so, Scheveningen. Fish drying barns at Scheveningen. Quite insightful, right? Not bad there. He says, perhaps you know The Hague and Scheveningen better than I, but in case you do not know, I offer to accompany you there. Then he says here, speaking for myself, I hate skepticism just as much as sentimentality. I do not want to suggest that the artists here are skeptics or cynics, but sometimes they seem to be and take on a certain air of it. He says, I have hardly the right to criticize them. How much that is beautiful in the sense of picturesque is disappearing these days. The other day I read something by the son of Charles Dickens. He said, if my father were to come back, he would find little of the London he described. The old London is disappearing, is being sanified. And in our country, it is just the same. Those nice little courts, they're being replaced by rows of houses, in the highest degree unpicturesque, unless they're still being built, for then they are, what with the sheds and scaffolding and workmen, very pleasant to look at. For instance, there is a quarter behind Bazaar Street and Laan van Meerdervoort, where I've seen beautiful things, building plots being dug up or leveled, sheds, wooden huts, hoardings, etc., whatever you like. Rather interesting, too, are the public soup kitchens and, under all circumstances, the third-class waiting rooms. If I did not have to make city views for a living, I would do nothing but figure drawing these days. But I've not found anybody who would buy them, and I regularly have to pay for models, though now and then I can get people to pose for nothing. Oh, really? You're not being completely honest about that part. Except he says here, I'm very pleased with the model I have. I mean, that woman who was in my studio when you were here. That woman who was in my studio when you were here. Well, does he say I plan to marry her? For she is learning more every day and understands me. For instance, when something goes wrong and I fly into a rage and get up and say, damn, it's all wrong, or something even worse than that, she does not take it as a personal affront, as of course most others would. Well, he is paying her way. And she undergoes the tedious work of finding the right light and the right pose patiently. So I think her a honey. If I want to ascertain the height of a figure out of doors or to fix the right position of a little figure on a drawing I'm working on in the open air, as for instance the way a figure stands out against the background of a fishing boat on the beach and where the light touches it, I've only to say, be there at such and such a time, and she's there. And now he refers to the gossip to Rapard. He says, there's gossip enough because I'm always in her company, but why should that bother me? I've never had such a good assistant as this ugly, faded woman. In my eyes, she's beautiful. So it seems like he's trying to do some damage control with regard to scene and what Rapard saw, kind of thing. He says, her life has been rough and sorrow and adversity have put their marks upon her. Now I can do something with her. When the earth is not plowed, you can get no harvest from it. She has been plowed. And obviously that is a reference to something else, right? He says, and so I find more in her than in a crowd of unplowed ones. I hope you will write me soon again, and if you agree, I should like to correspond regularly. So bear in mind, Rappard has given him a little bit of money. One wonders whether this letter is to sort of perhaps get a, what's the word, another support system up and running, if that makes sense. Robbie Robbins says, for a pregnant woman, poor Christine was not eating very healthily, definitely not. He says, I should like to correspond regularly as far as our respective tasks permit, provided we warn each other as soon as our practical talk lapses into unpracticality, and without getting angry at such a warning, as was the case with Tierstig, as I told you. Tomorrow I hope to go into the dunes to the same fish drying barns. It's actually quite weird reading that and then actually having been there myself. It's actually weird um, reading him saying, tomorrow I want to go into the dunes, and then thinking, oh, I know what he's talking about. Because I actually cycled there when I stayed in The Hague for a couple of days in 2019. And those dunes are still there. Between the dunes are uh, World War II, what do you call them? Turrets, which are quite interesting. There's also quite a lot of grass in the dunes that sort of waves like this, which makes it quite atmospheric. He says, the other day I read that big book about Malay written by his friend Sincere. It is very interesting, and if you had not read it, I strongly recommend it. There's much in it that only Sincere could know because he was Malay's intimate friend. One finds absolutely new things in it. At least it was this way with me, though I've read quite a number of things about Malay. Well, goodbye with a handshake. Ever yours, Vincent. Okay, so now we go to, I think that, is it the 29th or the 30th? 30th of May, just this short postcard, written in English, interestingly enough. Let's confirm that. Is this written in English? My dear brother, today or tomorrow, something to pay my landlord. Sure enough, it is written in English. That's quite interesting. But not having up to now received any letter of yours. Oh, that's interesting. So, sometimes he writes in French, sometimes he writes in Dutch. Well, this one's actually written in English. There we go. My dear brother, today or tomorrow being the 1st of June, I promise to pay my landlord 5 guilders rent. So bear in mind he's sending this the day before, like a postcard. It's quite urgent. He's saying, and one wonders whether there's a little bit of coercion here, because a postcard anyone can read, right? So one wonders whether he's trying to, in a way, embarrass Theo, where he's saying, I need you to send me money urgently, and everyone can read it, right? One wonders whether that's going on here. I mean, the timing is quite important. Does he write it in English as a way of, what's the word? Not hiding it, but it's not going to be completely transparent in France what he's saying. There are only a few people who are going to know about that, but it is interesting. Anyway, he says, today or tomorrow being the 1st of June, I promise to pay my landlord 5 guilders rent of studio for the month of April, plus 750 guilders for last month makes 1250 guilders. But not having up to now received any letter of yours since that of May 12th, I have nothing to pay his 12 guilders and 50 with. The man will surely not give me any longer delay, but they can immediately sell my furniture publicly. Whatever may be your opinion concerning the things I told you, now bear in mind this is a postcard anyone can read. He couches it in sort of indirect language. So he says, whatever may be your opinion concerning the things I told you, do not let it come to this scandal. My drawings for Mauve are ready, but I shall not be able to get that money early enough. I say again, just kind of saying, My drawings are ready, but I'm just not going to get money for them early enough. Please send me money urgently. And of course, is he really going to be earning any money for those drawings? He says, I say again, let us, let us at all events avoid irregularity and public scandal and talk and write calmly on the subject till we know what ought to be done. Remember what I said about the culture of a family in terms of dealing with crisis. In a way, Van Gogh himself is, um, uh, what's the word, promoting that culture. He's saying, let's talk calmly on the subject. Let's continue. Let's have the ball continue rolling, and then we'll, instead of making any big decisions now, let's have the ball to continue rolling, and then make up our minds along the way. Right? He's saying basically, send me the rent money now, and we'll decide on the other stuff when that needs to be decided upon. Right? Susan says, I wonder in the closing of the letters, the handshake is reference to the business of Theo sending the money. Quite a good point there, Susan. Here he doesn't actually say with a handshake, just yours truly, almost like yours sincerely. He says, therefore, I hope you will send me what I so greatly want and will write. I work day and night and have a small drawing ready for you, which I'll send by and by. I have no money for a stamp. Excuse the postcard, and believe me, yours truly, Vincent. He's coming very, very close to begging here, isn't he? Just want to see where he says yours truly. Yeah, there it is, yours truly, Vincent. Now, if you look at the handwriting here, it looks like he may even have written this once or twice. I mean, it's quite a well executed letter. There's just that one little piece there where he scratched it out, but it's quite even, right? It's quite even. It goes from one end of the postcard to the other end. Everything fits into it quite well, but one wonders whether he practiced once or twice, to fit in everything he wanted to say. Did he write down on a piece of paper and then write it onto this postcard? I'm just saying it fits pretty well everything that he's saying. And there's only this single part there that's scratched out. Okay, so now I think we go into June. And this is a letter from Noonan. It's from his parents, and it's to Theo. And this is after visiting Theo in hospital. This is where I wanted to get to. So this is actually written on the 14th of June, and quite interesting. Vincent was somewhat surprised to see me. He was a little irritated. So his father visits him in hospital, surprised to see his father, but is also a little bit irritated. And he says, but I succeeded in bringing him back to a more normal mood and promised to come back the next day. He does not look bad. His pulse is calm and he's quite normal. He nurses grievances against Uncle Cord because he has not been very enthusiastic about his drawing. So he's not happy with Uncle Cord because Uncle Cord doesn't like his drawings very much, right? He says Van Rappard, who had seen them, had called them good. This Van Rappard remains faithful to him. He has written Vincent again to encourage him. I hope that there could not be any danger in that so-called model, could there? So this is obviously a reference to you know who, and that is really the bottom line. Is there a danger with this so-called model? Is there a relationship forming? Is there something serious going on? And obviously the answer is yes, Dad, there is, right? Then he goes on to say, he always remains strange and my expectations are not great. If only he does not go down more and more, if only he does not throw himself away on an unworthy creature. Quite a statement from Van Gogh Sr. If only he doesn't throw himself away on an unworthy creature. Don't say I'm too suspicious. I say these things to no one but you. And I mean, is his father too suspicious? He says, you will understand only too well what I fear. He has always had a penchant for people of lower classes, and out of sheer cussedness and a feeling of loneliness, a man might get entangled in the wrong sort of ties. And I think that is, in a way, totally true. You know, it's a little bit, what's the word? There's a bit of contempt there. I think that it's a bit of contemptuous from his father, but it's also to some extent true. That I do think Vincent was suffering from loneliness, but I don't know, maybe it's lacking a little bit of compassion as well. Anyway, he says, I don't know why there's this date. I'm not sure what that is about. 28 November 1882. Corey's enjoying much friendship from the Carp family in Helmond, one of the most distinguished families in that town. Therefore, on St. Nicholas Day, Corey should give a present to Nord Carp, who's at the HB with him. So anyway, the other Van Gogh brother is somewhere else, right? Okay, so I think this is going to be the last letter I'm going to deal with. I would really like to get to where Vincent talks about seeing his father. But I think we'll do that in the next. So this is written from the municipal hospital. This is really where I want to get to before we jump forward in time. So let me do one more letter from June, and then I'm going to deal with this thing, the peasant woman. I think this is it. No, it's this one. It's a really long letter again. So yeah, he says, now I'm glad that you've given me your frank opinion on Scene, namely that she tricked me and that I allowed myself to be taken in. Okay, well, I'm not gonna do any more letters now. We'll deal with June in episode, is it 23, right? Not hiding around the bush with that statement, yeah. So we'll deal with the beginning of June to basically the middle of June, and then we're going to jump forward in time. Basically, I think we're going to go to where he's now living with his parents. I think when we finish the entire narrative, we can actually come back to what happens between June and him going to his parents, if there's any appetite for that, right? So what I want to do now is take you to this particular article. It's from The Observer, but it's actually published in The Guardian, if that makes sense. It's titled The Beauty of the New Van Gogh is to point up the work that goes into genius. And the part I want to emphasize is that's the part that I want to emphasize. The work that goes into genius. So I've kind of highlighted a bit from the article. I'm just going to go through that now. So let me put a link to this in chat, to the article. So I must say, how does one say this sort of delicately? articles like this is what got me. Well, talk about how the Google algorithm works. You click on this link, and can you see it's got an ad for StreamYard here? Just shows you how Google is watching and working. Anyway, let's see if I can just bring this up like that. There we go. Maybe do it like that. Okay. So the article in The Guardian, which is / The Observer, is a good example of why I became a writer. And like I said, I've got to try and express this kind of delicately. Um, I think the article is written very well. I think the writer is quite intelligent. I think some of the sentiments she expresses are true, but I couldn't help reading it and basically disagreeing with what she was saying and feeling that it's important that what she says is countered or contradicted. In other words, when I was a lot younger and I would read things, I would often feel like the person who wrote this has a third of the picture or half of the picture, or just is missing some important fragments of an argument, right? They don't have the complete picture here. They don't have the right perspective. And I felt I need to participate in this because a lot of things are being misrepresented. And although she writes very well, and I don't think I write as well, I think my thought process is perhaps a little bit more sophisticated. My knowledge base is perhaps better. And you might say, yeah, right, kind of thing. But I'm now going to take you through why I say that. And obviously, it's within the context of Van Gogh. So I'm only going to highlight certain parts of this article. I think overall it's quite well written. But what I want to walk you through is, I've taken you guys through a lot of the letters of Van Gogh, and I want to show you how journalists can often have quite a adequate knowledge of certain things, but it's nevertheless incomplete, and it's I don't want to say it's a warped perspective, but it ends up being quite a superficial perspective, right? And journalists think that they're experts on everything, and they are often they develop an expertise, and they often are well versed and knowledgeable on certain things. But I think it's different to say that they are experts or that they have expert knowledge. They are simply sharing a perspective, and that's in that they carry a responsibility. Their perspective is echoing all over, so it's important to get the details right. Okay, so these are the parts that I've highlighted from the article. These are her words. So she writes, the Van Gogh archetype is supported by a powerful mythos that portrays him as unlucky in love, career, finances, and fate, a doomed genius, crazed and gifted, volatile and vulnerable, an eccentric who went unrecognized, whose self belief bordered on delusion, and who swung between rapture and depression. Now, in a way, I agree with all of that, and I think it's quite well worded, but I don't know whether I agree that he swung between rapture and depression. I mean, if you take the quite extreme pendulum swings that we've been dealing with now, would you say that he's sort of giddy with love or giddy with joy, or does he seem, despite what is happening, does he seem actually quite rational? Also, does he ever seem depressed? Right. So on the face of it, superficially, when you read that sentence, it all seems reasonable. It seems sort of standard and basic and basically true. but I don't know whether it is. So let me read it again. The Van Gogh archetype is supported by a powerful mythos that portrays him as unlucky in love. Yes, that's right. Unlucky in career. Yes, that's right. Unlucky in finances. I would actually say maybe he was quite lucky with finances, but certainly he didn't sell his art, if that's what she means. A doomed genius, maybe. Crazed and gifted, maybe. Volatile and vulnerable, yes. An eccentric who went unrecognized, that sounds right. Whose self-belief bordered on delusion, maybe to some extent. But then I don't know if you would say swung between rapture and depression. I don't get the sense that he's irrational. I'm talking about in his writing. He doesn't sound like his arguments kind of make sense, even if what he's doing is not that sensible, right? His writing is lucid. His writing is intelligent. Um, he doesn't. He's not talking about the bliss of marriage. He's talking about the hardship of marriage and what he's doing. He's also not depressed, even though his situation is quite depressing and quite difficult and quite dire. He doesn't seem to be depressed. And let me ask you, so far, have you experienced Van Gogh as depressed? Like where one letter after another, he says, I'm so miserable. I'm so unhappy. I can't paint. I'm so desperate for money from you that I've given up. Does that come across at all? Um, Robbie Robbins says it gives the impression of bipolar disorder. Karina says your great analytical mind at work. Okay. So, but you guys agree that there isn't actually a sign or symptom of depression, right? Depression isn't relevant thus far. We might come to a point where he is miserable, but even when he breaks up with Scene or when things don't work out with Scene, he's not depressed. He sort of jumps ship and he ends up getting himself into something entangled into something completely different. Susan says mild depression, if any. Yeah, I agree with that. But he's not depressed. He's maybe concerned. He's maybe um, anxious, but he's definitely not depressed. He does seem to be a bit ill. He's not sleeping and so on. But I'm just saying he doesn't have any of those symptoms of a clinical depression where he is, paralyzed or anything like that. Timmy, do you want to sit over here? Okay, so now we go to um, the next part of the article. Is she writes. It's moving and encouraging, if you're an artist too, to know that the names we revere can also go down creative paths that don't work out, lose interest in a piece, or simply find their own work a bit blah and not worth pursuing. What she's trying to get at is if I can just bring up the title here. So she talks about the work that goes into genius, right? And that this newly discovered portrait, this portrait here, shows the necessary routine of the creative process, that some of the creative process is just, hit and miss, essentially, right? So she writes here basically that, we revere artists, but even they can go down creative paths that don't work out. She writes about artists losing interest in a piece or simply find their own work a bit blah, not worth pursuing. Beautiful and emotionally charged artworks which move millions of spectators across thousands of years. It's a little bit over the top to say that. I mean, it's not thousands of years, 150 years, are often the result of rehearsal, boredom, rejigging, practice, dissatisfaction. Then this is this is the part that I want to emphasize. She writes, quote, the path to genius is strewn with dozens of mediocre attempts on the backs of canvases, compositions that don't quite come together, attempted techniques that look somewhat ham-fisted, or fads that burn themselves out fast. Let me just take this part out. The path to genius is strewn with dozens of mediocre attempts on the backs of canvases. Now, I know what she's getting at, that there's a lot of ordinariness that is part of the whole thing, right? There's a lot of ordinary executions that are part of the artistic process, right? Yeah, okay. I had a thought on that. I can't quite remember what it was. Anyway, she goes on to say, quote, if you're an artist, your studio is your office and you have to clock in repeatedly and for long stretches of time and do your work before anything half decent comes out, let alone gets completed. This discovery contributes to the idea of Van Gogh as a dedicated artist, someone who had professional sensibility, even if he didn't make it during his lifetime. So I want to ask you, do you agree that he had a professional sensibility? Given what we've just been talking about here, given his relationship with scene and how professional that was when he basically was like, I could give a tuppence what society thinks. I mean, other artists are telling him, you crazy, right? Um, do you agree that he had a professional sensibility? And I think what's quite interesting here is he does have a great work ethic, but I don't know whether he has a professional sensibility. She also writes, even if he didn't make it during his lifetime, he didn't produce perfection every time in a burst of creative and emotional fusion. He tried something, realized it wasn't working, and tried something else. He did what we all do, regardless of what field we work in. It shows a degree of self-awareness, measure, and critical self-appraisal that Van Gogh is not known for. So I think that's true, that it does show a degree of self-awareness. And I think it's true that he has critical self-appraisal. But think about that in the context of what we're talking about right now, right? Think about this idea of him having self-awareness with regard to the Key Voss episode, self-awareness with the what's the word, the scene story, right? He seems to be self-aware, but he's nevertheless acting in a strange way. So although there's self-awareness, it seems a little misguided or misdirected, right? Then she also talks about him having critical self-appraisal that Van Gogh is not known for. Now, I don't know, maybe I'm just being contrarian, maybe I'm just being argumentative, but at the same time that he's um, taking these strange routes in terms of his life, in terms of his love life especially, he does seem very self-aware. I mean, his letters are, he's trying to anticipate what Theo is thinking. He's trying to anticipate what others have said. He does seem to be very self-aware. He's certainly become quite wise and realistic to reality compared to how he was not that long ago, right? Jean Carroll says, why didn't my notification notify me? Yeah, for the end. Sorry, though. Well, thanks for joining us, Jean. Karina says, exactly, work ethic, yes. anyway, and then she ends up, I think some of the statements she makes in this article are quite on point, but then I feel like she ruins it by saying Van Gogh, the man, died over a century ago at the age of only 37 after a self-inflicted gunshot wound. That's just reverting to the whole stereotype around Van Gogh. And she also ends that off by saying a man who only suffered and starved when he was alive. Do you agree with that statement that he only suffered and starved when he was alive? Do you think that that is true to say that Van Gogh only suffered and starved? Because if you think about what was going on with Cena, he was doing, I guess, what he wanted. He was having the Van Gogh version of fun. He was having the Van Gogh version of this is what I want, right? He was sort of living in sin and he was rebelling, but he was sort of doing what he wanted to do. Um, and I don't think that he starved in the way that a lot of people think. I mean, his brother kept sending him money, and he did have difficulty where he ate bread and he drank coffee, but he also chose. It wasn't like he. I mean, if he could have also said, "Don't send me any paint supplies, send me money for food." He could have made that choice. Um, Ricardo says he had panoramic awareness beyond suffering. Yeah, um, but like I don't see it as he just suffered and starved. Like the letters show that there were dimensions and subtleties way beyond what we're talking about here. Beyond suffering and starving. He was also living, he also had a love life, and he had some, I guess, happy moments within that. And what's more is he didn't see suffering as suffering, he saw suffering as something that was a kind of a Dickensian um, motif. It was something that he saw as symbolically good or interesting. He saw something compelling in the peasant situation. In other words, what we see as suffering and poverty, he saw as edifying and um, what's the word? Part of his destiny, in a sense. Paddy says he found great joy and meaning in nature and in his art. So, you know, I'm just saying, yeah, you've got this journalist who feels like she understands him, and she seems to me to be perpetuating the mythology, right? Karina says he took pleasure in so many details of life. He wasn't always starving. So the other thing that I want to highlight here is um, this was my perception when I read the article. I've got to admit, it's quite late here. It's past 11 o'clock at night, and I'm quite tired. And when I originally read this article, I had all these thoughts like fireworks to my mind. Now I'm like, wow, what? Because I've highlighted certain things, I'm like, what is my opinion on that? And like a lot of that's now vanished. But one of the things I did note here was that we see the world through our own prisms, and that can be a prison for the truth, and thus for ourselves. Thus, the only way to change the prison is to change our prism. To change the world, we must not change our minds, but open our minds to a more nuanced reality. So that was my response to reading this article, was that this article is being seen through a prism, and not a unusual one that is somewhat accurate to Van Gogh, but nevertheless a prism. And that prism can be a prison um, for the truth. If you want the truth on Van Gogh, read his letters. That's as simple as that. And but that prism becomes a prison for ourselves as well. And if you want to escape the prison of your reality, the prison of how you experience your life. You've got to change. You don't have to change your mind, but open your mind to a more nuanced reality. Recognize that you're seeing things through a prism, and try and move the prism aside, right? Do you want me to put that statement in chat so it's kind of explicit? Um, Susan says his artwork reflected his personal pursuits. Some were bright and cheerful. Yeah. So that's my spiel for today. Well, see, it's gone on for over 2 hours 40. Margaret Zabinski, thanks so much for that. I appreciate it. So, so at last we've come to June 1882. I'm not quite sure how far we're going to jump to, but it might be to like a year and a half. But we want to jump from his hospitalization in The Hague to him going back home. And there's a lot of drama waiting for us in Newnan, right? There's a lot of drama waiting for us where he goes home and now he's back with his parents, and he's a little bit wiser, but they also wiser to the fellow that they've got to sort of look after, this person that is actually their own flesh and blood. And then a lot of these scandals are now going to take place not in a faraway town, but actually under their own roof. And they're going to have congregants whispering to them, do you know that your son is doing this, and so on and so on. So the next phase of his life is definitely going to be quite interesting. We're not quite there yet. We've still got to get through half the month of June, and that'll be the subject matter of the next episode. So 23 will be the sort of end part of The Hague up till June. And as I say, obviously things don't work out with Scene. Scene eventually abandons him. But we're not going to deal with that part. We'll just deal with where he finds himself back in Newnan. And that's definitely going to be quite interesting. Okay, so that is it from me. Thanks a lot, Karina. And Timmy also says thanks. Thank you. Okay. Wanzi says, we see the world through our own prisms, and that can be a prism for the truth, and that's for ourselves. Awesome. Ricardo says, so now it's there's always something new under the sun, and not there's nothing new under the sun. Thanks, Nick. Okay, cool. Okay, so I want to thank you guys for being here. I'm sorry, Jean, you didn't get the notification. I'm not quite sure why. But yeah, I think for a change, I didn't put anything up on Patreon. So anyway, True Jedi Forever. Didn't know you were here, but good to see you here. Thanks, members. Thanks for the super chats. See you guys again on Wednesday for episode 23. All the best. Take care. Enjoy the rest of your weekend.